Alrighty, I am back. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who has the fairest programming of all? And I'd just like to remind you that Haggie Shack Radio and Wolf Spirit Radio are both totally listener-supported. So, if you like what you hear, click on that donate button and give what you can. We sure appreciate all the love and support that we get from you. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest programming of all? Interacting with other like-minded people, friends, novices, students, etc., on your path can help, though, especially if you have a humble attitude. But often you run into the same problems just mentioned above. Ultimately, interacting with a true teacher, any enlightened being in a physical body like Zayin was, is the best way to find and analyze your programming flaws, and the only way to root out and dispose of your most subtle and deeply ingrained programming flaws. We'll get into this more in the chapter on teachers, but for now, we can take a quick look at how it applies to routing out, seeing, and changing negative programming in a way that applies to what you just read. A true teacher is like a clear mirror and an exorcist. Thus, there is no one more capable of finding your flaws, bringing them up to you, forcing you to see them, like a mirror forces you to see your physical self when you look into it, and then helping you change. Unlike other people, the true teacher is a clear mirror. He has no ego-based opinions or negative programming himself that could get in the way of clearly showing you your ego-based opinions and negative programming. Also, he doesn't have any desire just to win the fight or not be wrong, like most people do. First of all, he doesn't engage in arguments. Discussions, yes. Arguments, no. So all criticism is done strictly in the environment of pointing out your flaws, to help you grow and improve yourself. And if you have actually chosen a true teacher to help you change, by the very fact that you have chosen the teacher to help you, you will likely have more respect for what he says to you. Thus, you will likely be more receptive to what he reveals to you about yourself. Thus, it will be easier to see and make changes. But try to remember, while this is one of the ways a true teacher serves you, it is not a pleasant task for him. When a true teacher shows you yourself, what you see about yourself is often not a pretty picture. Since most people actually believe, live, feel, and think that they are their separate selves, then any criticism is seen as a threat and thus an attack, and defenses go up and are called into action. Even the caring criticism from a loving true teacher whom you've asked to deliberately give you criticism to help you is seen and felt by you, your selfish separate self, as a personal attack on you. Your selfish separate self realizes your inner being's attempt to gain control from the separate self is an attack on it. Thus, what the true teacher shows you about yourself triggers a response, and your separate self will want to attack back to defend itself. It will allow this to happen, even internally. It will hamper your process of changing and hurt your true teacher. And even though you may hold your tongue, your true teacher will feel your animosity anyway. And true teachers, by their very nature, are the kindest, most loving, and most sensitive beings on earth. So it hurts them greater than it would hurt a normal person. I know. I hurt mine many times. Zayin is gone from this earthly plane now, and I deeply regret some of my responses and feelings towards him. I know he understands, and understood even then, but still, He didn't deserve any more pain, and I didn't need to make it so hard. Or maybe I did, but in retrospect, I could have been more humble, more receptive, and made the process easier on him. A true teacher is doing nothing but showing you the negative thing you have created and nurtured. Yet they become the primary target of negativity from the student, simply because the student's separate self is threatened by the student seeing himself. So, if you ever have such a true teacher who loves you and is sacrificing his life to help you, remember that when you come under attack, your teacher is doing this because he loves you, and you ask him to do this painful, dirty work. When you react negatively to truth that exposes yourself, this is very painful for someone at a true teacher's level of consciousness. Yet he takes it. He endures that pain that you caused him. So great is his love for you. Thoughts, the invisible building blocks of our physical realities. Regardless of the percentage, the subconscious mind undoubtedly influences our lives to a great extent. Also, what we consciously think about, be it from conscious or subconscious sources, has a great deal to do with determining what we make of ourselves and what we create for ourselves in life. So, there are basically two areas of the thought process we need to be very aware of. The thoughts that program our subconscious biocomputer, like those just described, and the interrelated conscious thoughts that construct our physical realities. As pointed out earlier, every man-made thing on earth was first a thought, just a simple thought. You can't taste it, touch it, smell it, or see it. Yet, it's the most powerful human device on earth. No human being has ever done anything without first having a thought conception, followed by the whole train of thoughts necessary for it to become a reality in the physical world. As amazing as it may seem when you stop and really think about it, the truth is that everything you have ever done in your entire life was the result of a thought. And that's just a drop in the bucket compared to the full potential of the mind's power. When you consider all that, it isn't hard to realize that we need to be very selective about the thoughts that we allow to run around inside our heads. Also, as mentioned in an earlier chapter, thoughts are building blocks of virtually everything else surrounding our lives. The mind is a kind of construction worker who assembles the building blocks, and the will is the construction boss. And even though we are all dealt different hands in the game of life, how we play those hands affects the way the game goes, and eventually the way the results come out. And what we think determines the way the game goes. Once more, our entire life is greatly the result of our mental attitudes, our thoughts, and resultant actions. Biocomputer domination, the invisible thought maker. Back to my earlier discussion with Zayin. But Father, surely there's more to changing than just reprogramming our beliefs and subconscious mind. I mean, I studied the subconscious even before coming here, and I know its power. But at least most of what we do every day is conscious, isn't it? Yes, definitely, but no. And don't call me Father Shirley. What? That's a joke, son. Oh, you students, always so serious. Of course there is more to it than subconscious. You must be concerned with your conscious thoughts and redirect them if need be. If it wasn't an issue, there'd be no need for the conscious part of the word subconscious. But not only do we need to be concerned with thoughts that are an aspect of the conscious mind, we also need to be aware of the many thoughts that continually surface from the subconscious mind, without us even noticing them. They are conscious thoughts, to be sure, but they are in a gray area that an untrained or unalert mind doesn't notice consciously. The subconscious is very powerful and constantly influences our lives by giving us impulsive reactions and a continuous stream of thoughts. These impulses and thoughts can include strong emotions like dislikes, hate, fear, etc., already formed decisions and judgments, ideas, and physical actions of all kinds. A temper tantrum is just one example of those emotional surfacing impulses. But whether thoughts or emotions, they pass unnoticed into conscious awareness, and once there, we find ourselves thinking or feeling the thoughts and emotions that come from our programming without even knowing it. It literally takes over our thought processes and feelings and can be very destructive in our lives. Such thoughts can come from subconscious programming that has nothing to do with what a person would think ordinarily, or if they consciously thought things out. Yet people experience these thoughts and feelings just as if they were their own consciously chosen conscious thoughts and beliefs. And because people believe these thoughts to be their own, they are often defensive and use mental evasion tricks, bullshit as it's commonly called, if anything threatens to really bring these subconscious thoughts and ideas into the light of conscious thought examination. For instance, when someone's words or actions are really just their subconscious programming, playing itself out, and their words or actions have no logical explanation, what happens if you ask an analytical question about why they are saying or doing such and such? What kind of response do you get? I guess something like, I don't know. You can do better than that, Peniel. How many times have you asked someone something like, why are you being that way? And the response was something like, that's just the kind of person I am, or that's just how I feel, or that's just what I believe, or that's just how I was raised. And as far as they're concerned, that's the end of the discussion. They don't want to deal with the reasons why they feel, believe, or are that way. They have a sign up, separate self at work, do not disturb. Any further prodding as to why may get an angry, illogical backlash. Such statements often accompany behavior which can't be logically or consciously explained and are offered as rationalizations for some kind of negative behavior or refusal to open the mind and think. And many of us have been raised by parents whose answers to our question as a child was often, just because. That's right. Anyway, do you know why the apple falls to the ground? Other than gravity? Yes. Because it's ripe? No, just because. Zayn was in unusual spirits, and if I didn't know better, I'd have thought he was indulging in some unusual spirits. Oh no, I thought to myself, it's catching. He looked at me sternly and then said, say goodnight, Gracie. Good night, Gracie. Father, can you be serious for a moment so I can finish trying to get this whole thought thing down? In one bite? Father, please, I still have hours of meditations to do. Yes, very well. Is this better? He made a serious face. Yes. Okay. Now where were we, Peniel? Ah, yes. Along with the subconsciously generated thoughts that we've discussed, there are also subconsciously generated physical actions. And even beyond the auto-physical responses, there are the physical actions that result from what you think. What? Just think about it. Setting the proper thought course. So even if we consciously want to think and be one way, we might not be wanting that or doing that subconsciously. Well, what do you think? Father. Again, a tremendous amount of conscious thoughts and actions, in fact, most of what we take to be our conscious thoughts and actions, are actually from areas of the subconscious. That's why it's so important for us to understand and properly use the process in which thoughts create our physical experiences. Since we are constantly being manipulated by our own programming, if it is not in order, it will create many problems in our physical lives. In fact, subconscious programming, things you aren't even aware of, can work at complete cross-purposes to your conscious desires, thoughts, and goals, negating any progress you attempt to make. So what is the first thing I should do to change what you seem to be saying is my slavery to my subconscious programming? To break free of such slavery, you must first decide that you really want to change. You can't just have a mild intellectual attitude like, I think I should change. If you really don't want to change desperately, and you're just pretending, or you just think you should change, then you're just spinning your wheels and playing a game by trying to change. Are you saying I'm doing that? No, this is not just about you. These are teachings for the whole world, Peniel, for everyone. Quit thinking so paranoid about yourself and just listen, or you'll miss half of it all. Next, you need to gain access to your subconscious mind and reprogram yourself with positive and constructive new programming. This puts you in control, letting you decide what you want to think and what you want to do in life, rather than allowing the program to decide for you. Programming. So what do I reprogram myself with, especially considering the paradox of truth? The ancient Atlantean teachings of the children state that it is absolutely necessary to view and maintain our own programming from a universal state of consciousness in order to maintain oneness with the universal spirit while living on earth. This was conceived to prevent our consciousness from falling in ancient times, but it still applies. So either very deep contemplative meditation or enlightenment? Yes, enlightenment is really the best way to have this occur. Getting the new programming from God, from the hierarchy. In lieu of that, get recommendations from an adept, a true teacher, who is getting it for you from the hierarchy, and see if your inner voice tells you it's right. Even after we've cleaned up our old programming, then how do we keep from getting new negative programming? Good question again. Besides analyzing and reprogramming all our beliefs, we need to attempt to prevent new ones from getting programmed without our conscious choice. So, at the very least, we must make our analysis and reprogramming an ongoing process. What meditation will help me the most with that? Any meditation technique that works well for you is good. As you know, the teachings present a variety of specific meditation techniques and consciousness tools that can help us go further than our normal consciousness limitations, and ultimately directly experience oneness with universal consciousness. Those can all help you to reprogram yourself. Author's note: instructions for these ancient meditation and energy techniques are explained in detail in the second half of this book. Some you may already know because of the other religions spawned by the children, but these are the original forms. There are also different languages that can be used to speak to your mind. We discuss these in the chapter on visualization and affirmations. Zayin continued, one day soon, you will be able to use the skills, knowledge, and abilities you have developed over your lifetimes to let the universal spirit work through you in such a way as to recreate one of the best of the ancient Atlantean vibrational techniques to help others reprogram themselves. The technology to do this and other things you will use to bring light to an ever-darkening world will soon be available again, first in the universities in Russia and the United States. You will find what you need for the vibrational tools there. I have foreseen in my dreams that something you will need for one of these things you will be doing in the future will be found in an old German car and an old American car. Another story not for this book. Okay, you're joking again, right? No. When have you known me to be anything but serious? Nothing to say? You'll see. By that time in your future, you will have no need of the Atlantean vibrational reprogramming tools for yourself, for you will have already reprogrammed yourself. But for others, it will be a great blessing. A new ancient tool. Everything Zayin told me came to pass, even about parts I needed from antique cars. We are fortunate to again have one of the most powerful reprogramming tools at our disposal, one whose roots are from Atlantis. Atlantean technology was quite advanced in comparison to ours. Many methods were developed for healing and consciousness raising that involved a technology based on the understanding of universal laws and vibration. Color, sound, and olfactory aspects of vibration were used to access and affect the body and mind. Fortunately, one of the tools that used sound was able to be made again with the advancement of crude electronic sciences. It utilizes very specific sound waveforms and frequencies that weren't possible to make in modern times until the invention of the electronics capable of specific frequency and waveform generation. The resultant consciousness-raising tool I'm speaking of uses sound waves to integrate the mind and allow access to and reprogramming of the subconscious mind. These Atlantean vibrational sounds have been recorded, and by the time this book is released, they should have been copied for those of you who wish to use them on cassette tape and/or CD. Thus, while it is very powerful, it is cheap and easy to use. See the meditation sections for more information and the back of the book for ordering instructions. Besides allowing reprogramming, again, you can read the specifics on how to modify it yourself to change your programming in the second half of the book. But the function of the vibrations are to integrate the threefold aspects of being: conscious, subconscious, and universal conscious, or physical, mental, spiritual realms. Goal setting in the subconscious. Worthy of your consideration, too, is this. When a goal is programmed into the subconscious mind, its automatic thought generation and powers of influence all work for you, constantly and perseveringly directing you towards fulfillment of that goal. This will be discussed further in the chapter on goals and ideals. Combining an ideal or goal with your reprogramming is very powerful. Another aspect of the subconscious mind that is of interest to us is in the area of control of the autonomic nervous system. More on this later. Defense against unwanted programming. Unfortunately, our lack of familiarity with the workings and programmability of our subconscious mind has not only created problems in our emotional and personal lives, but more importantly, it has left us prey to many individuals and organizations that would have us see things their way. Most of us don't even know when this has happened. We have a full set of rational reasons for why we believe this or that, and the sons of Belial and their servants know how to and do use such methods of influence. The fact is, a great deal of what you think and of what you believe has little to do with your independent and creative thought processes. I know that sounds incredible and frightening, but it is quite true. Even that which might be considered mundane or of little importance, such as advertising to sell various products, uses techniques of psychological, subconscious, and a subliminal manipulation. Listen to the music. Before we go on, I would like to touch upon the power of music, especially as it relates to unwanted programming. Music has been said to be the closest thing to a language of God. It has been used for rituals since the beginning of time. The Catholic Church used music by Bach to inspire churchgoers. I read that Ravel's Bolero was actually based on an African shamanic ritual music piece used to stimulate or open the chakras. Allegedly, in his first public performance of it, he was devastated because the audience failed to applaud at all. 15 minutes later, as he sat depressed in the alley behind the concert hall, he heard the audience suddenly giving rave applause. They were apparently so moved, stunned, entranced, or in reverie, that it took them quite a while to come out of it and respond. The first half of Ravel's Daphne et Chloe, Suite 2, is like a musical representation of the Kundalini rising and the subsequent bliss. It is incredibly beautiful. Music definitely has the power to make you strongly feel all kinds of emotions, from the bliss of touching God, to depression and loneliness, to feelings of lust or violence. The right, positive, instrumental or lyrical music can be a wonderful meditation in and of itself. But there is far more here than meets the eye or ear. Even before I came to the monastery, back when I was studying alternative religions and spiritual paths as a young teenager, I was also studying psychology and learning things about the subconscious mind and subliminal programming. At some point back then, I also came to realize that there was a major war going on between the forces of dark and light, right there on the radio and on records. And no one I personally knew at the time even noticed it. And I believed it had at least some effect on the listeners via the subconscious. I'm not talking about alleged backward masking, subliminal programming. I can't say I've heard that at all, but the backward masking clips that I have heard, which some people claim are satanic messages, could just as easily be a drunk slurring words about their laundry. Whereas the kind of thing I'm talking about was something quite different, very clear, and overtly blatant. I'm referring to lyrics that were and still are right here up front, flaunting themselves in people's faces, or ears and brains in this case. I'd noticed that most people didn't really listen or really pay attention to the lyrics of a song. And it seemed to me that because of this, they were getting subliminal information just by virtue of ignoring the lyrics. Psychological studies were being done about this sort of thing back then. But as usual, there was no consensus among scientists, and some studies were secretly done for advertising purposes. On the studies that were available, some supported and some argued against the theories that related to my conclusion. So what can you do? Make up your own mind, which is what I did. From my own observations and studies, I concluded that the less people paid attention to the lyrics, the more the lyrics bypassed their normal conscious mind filters and defense mechanisms and went right into their subconscious minds. My studies in hypnosis had shown how things that slipped right by the conscious mind and couldn't be consciously recalled were being stored and recorded by the subconscious constantly, like a built-in human personal surveillance system. I heard of one incident where the police used hypnosis to get the license number of a car used in a robbery. The information was stored in a man's subconscious and was merely seen by him only with his peripheral vision. He never looked directly at the license plate. But the problem was, this personal surveillance system, the subconscious mind, wasn't just a recorder. It had influence with many aspects of our lives, emotions, beliefs, personality, etc. Anyway, as I studied song lyrics, I found many interesting things. Some, of course, were just mild, self-oriented love songs or party songs, but some were clearly more negative, from self-destructive to out-and-out evil of all kinds. Yet these were never noticed or complained about by the public at the time. Other songs had positive, uplifting, and truly spiritual lyrics. In fact, it seemed to me that if higher and lower consciousness beings of any kind wanted to communicate with and affect the minds of the masses, it was a perfect medium for it. Some lyrics were so spiritual that one would almost have to conclude that the songwriter was enlightened and had great spiritual knowledge. Then, later in life, I got to meet many of the musicians whose lyrics were so strikingly saint-like and spiritual. I discovered that some were just average consciousness people. Some may be a little above average, some may be below average, and some were egoed-out jerks. What they all had in common was they were getting stoned on hallucinogenic drugs, and since playing music was like a meditation technique, they were getting into a trance-like state and just channeling these incredible lyrics. On the dark side, the same thing was happening, but the musicians were definitely way below average consciousness. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating any kind of censorship, other than personal censorship. The lesson: make sure you know the lyrics of the music you're listening to. Read the lyric sheets if you must. Then choose what you want to listen to, knowing that whatever it is, you're allowing some of it into your conscious and subconscious mind, and it may have effects. Now, on to other, deeper aspects of programming. Realizing you have been brainwashed. Sometimes I hear the word brainwashing thrown about, usually in reference to religious cults, political ploys, or captives of some kind. Such talk always makes me stop and think to myself, Brainwashing from what? To what? It is usually just brainwashing. From one framework of unconscious mental programming to another framework of unconscious mental programming. Please don't get me wrong. I'm in no way defending mind manipulation by religious cults, political movements, governments, car salesmen, or any other individual, organization, who would use means that breach the sanctity of mental freedom or free will. My point, though, is that we are already brainwashed, and still in the process, because our programming was not voluntary or consciously chosen. And where have all of us received our involuntary programming from? Cults. Shocking, isn't it? But it's true. Now let's just try saying that again, only not using an abbreviation. And where have all of us received our involuntary programming from? Our cultures. Not as shocking, right? Yet still just as true. And the fact is, regardless of who or what involuntarily programmed you, it still comes down to this. You didn't choose your own programming or beliefs. And that comes with serious problems. Unless you were involuntarily programmed by an enlightened being, and the enlightened being don't do that kind of thing to others. Interestingly enough, the word cult is merely just an abbreviation of the word culture. But it is deliberately used in a defamatory, inflammatory, and negative way. It is harder to demonize a group of people you call a culture rather than a group of people you call a cult. So when we, others, or the media, are talking about a particular unique group, tribe, or religion, we call them a culture. If we want to present it in a positive light, or a cult, if we want to present it in a negative light, and conjure up fear and loathing. It's all depending on how we feel about them, or want someone else to feel about them. Involuntary programming, such as that which we receive from our culture and its robots, our culturally programmed peers, involves attempting to trample our free will choices, just as much as involuntary reprogramming. Cultural and peer programming doesn't trample our free will nearly as much as true, classic, military-type brainwashing, but still, people have no idea what a substantial and nearly total influence it has been on their lives. No one realizes how few free will choices they make, and have made, for actually choosing how they live their own lives. Before I go any further, please understand, this whole area of discussion involves complex paradoxes. I'm about to focus on and discuss only one aspect of the paradox, how and where you were raised, and how strongly the involuntary programming from that affects your life. But one should keep in mind that there is something to genetics, breeding, and behind it all, karma. Note, who your soul is, so to speak. What you need to experience in life and why. And why you were born with certain genetics, in a certain culture, and raised a certain way. I have seen many newborn babies, in which I can immediately see aspects of who they are, and what kind of personality they will have. That is their spirit, their soul, for the most part. So with all that in mind, let's focus on cultural programming, which, remember, is only half of the whole truth. Programming from our culture, family, and peers strongly affects our lives. This is more of an influence during a person's youth, and lessens to a degree at about age 7, then more at about age 14, and then quite substantially when their soul really kicks in, fully at around 21, and a person regains their full past level of consciousness. At that point, they can really start making more free will changes in their lives, and either expand their awareness, consciousness, or degenerate. For instance, why is a child raised by a Buddhist family in a Buddhist culture likely to be a Buddhist when he grows up? Similarly, why is a Lutheran child or a Muslim child or a Jewish child, also raised in the beliefs of their own family and culture, very likely to grow up having the same belief? Why is the abused child of an abused mother and a wife child-beating father likely to grow up and live the same way? Programming plays an essential role. People are all programmed by their families, friends, schools, teachers, news media, books, magazines, you name it. Just think. If 98% of everything you think, believe, and do is from your subconscious mind, and it's been programmed by someone else, what are the primary influences that control your destiny in life? It's staggering to think about, isn't it? As I write this, there is a new television sitcom that just premiered that involves the clash of cultures, cults, between a husband who was raised as a meat-eating, rich, conservative lawyer for the federal government. His wife is a vegetarian who was raised as a radical liberal hippie who teaches yoga and protests the government. It makes for great comedy, but it also makes a point. If those children's parents had been reversed, and their upbringing and programming thus been reversed, their roles would be exactly the opposite of what they are. The wife would be the conservative government lawyer, and the husband would be the groovy hippie dude. Again, excluding the concept that they are already what they are soul-wise and were just karmically born into those respective family situations to enable them to return to being what they have already made themselves into, internally. Can you say that you truly filtered, analyzed, and controlled the programming you received your whole life that developed your beliefs and behavior patterns? The brain of a newborn child has little programming, yet there's not much there. So you can't literally call it brainwashing when it begins to get programmed. But programming is programming, whether it is for the first time or it is reprogramming, brainwashing of old data. Everyone has been programmed. Everyone has been brainwashed. You have been programmed and brainwashed. You may not know it or want to accept it, but you have been. And you are under the control of that programming right now. And most everything about your life has to do with it. You're even reacting to what you're reading in this book, right at this moment, partly based on your programming. Even when programming is altered of a person's own choice, the average person doesn't have a clue to analyzing or programming their own mind, so they often accept programming from other people. Sometimes the programming they accept is from another unconsciously programmed person who is just passing along their programming to you. I saw so-and-so today and they said, and you believe it and just altered your programming to include it. Or, I read in the paper that, and you accept it as fact and alter your programming. But worse, you're also often programmed by people who really do understand programming and use it to manipulate you. So basically, brainwashing, in the sense of reprogramming, is the common everyday occurrence of voluntarily allowing someone else to alter our programming. When a person changes their beliefs or programming because of input from an external source, such as with brainwashing, they are only exchanging one unconscious program for another unconscious program. In other words, they're unconsciously exchanging one piece of garbage they didn't choose to have, and don't know that they didn't choose to have, for another piece of garbage they didn't choose to have and don't know that they didn't choose to have. This happens to us all the time. And the trouble is, this unconscious programming has immense power and control over our life and destiny. Take news stories, for instance. If they showed some pictures of bombs going off and said it was such and such terrorist group, and you accept it without direct experience, your programming has been altered in a serious way, possibly even creating feelings of anger and hate in you, and clouding fair judgment. Wars are started and prolonged this way. Products are sold this way. Votes are manipulated this way. Lives are controlled this way. In these modern times, many of your beliefs are formed through media exposure. You could totally believe tomorrow that we are about to be nuked by the Russians. Be ready to sacrifice your life and your child's life in order to go to war. And it could be totally false information. Your programming was simply altered a bit, all based on news stories that you accepted in your programming. Orson Welles' radio broadcast of War of the Worlds is a good example of this. It was a dramatic radio sci-fi show about Martians invading Earth, of all things. But it was done in the fashion of news coverage. People panicked all over the country. Not one person really saw a Martian ship, troops, fighting, nothing. I think people died of heart attacks and other things related to the panic. People got out their guns and were heading for the front lines. People believed this radio broadcast on a mass scale, even though it was a totally fictitious and far-fetched sci-fi story. You could be manipulated to believe that Muslims are good, or Muslims are evil and cruel, without ever knowing a Muslim, or even hearing about experiences with them from a clearly experienced, trusted friend. The same with Jews or Catholics or such and such, cultists or whatever. You could feel totally supportive of incarcerating or even killing a man that you've been told committed a murder even if it were truly false, and all based on stories. It happens all the time. You can send money to feed starving children, not know that the money's merely lining the pockets of a fat executive, and feel really good about yourself. If you don't take care and take full responsibility for programming yourself, somebody else will, and always does. And your belief and the world you mentally live in could be nothing but fabrication for purposes of controlling you. On the other hand, it is difficult to brainwash or program an individual who is well versed in their own mental processes, at least with the techniques and processes that are commonly called brainwashing. However, hardcore brainwashing, very sophisticated methods, various psychological techniques, physical torture, sleep deprivation, drugs, and/or electronic or surgical brain manipulation, can change nearly anyone. The book 1984 gives a good example of such intense manipulation and brainwashing. But in order to attain true independence of mind and free will, a person must consciously, deliberately analyze their beliefs and choose their own programming. And in the cases we've just cited, brainwashing can be a term that is used to mean someone has been truly, involuntarily programmed against their will. But brainwashing is often used as a nasty word for programming changes we disagree with. For instance, what actually happens when an adult changes religions, political parties, or any other belief? Let's say the person changed religions. If you think the change was fully voluntary and you don't mind his new choice, you might say he converted. But if you don't like the person's new religion or the people associated with it or whatever, you might say he's been brainwashed, regardless of whether the person chose to make those changes or not. Jesus was considered a cultist in his time and a manipulator, and his followers were considered cultists. Early Christians were considered a cult for a very long time. Early Protestant churches began as cults with a cult leader. Mormons also suffered the same label and subsequent persecution. European religious cults fled to the United States to avoid persecution, and many are now just considered major religions. Oftentimes, the only difference between a cult and a religion is how big it is, and how long it's managed to survive the attacks of society when it was considered a cult. It is sadly all too easy for people to forget and lack understanding and tolerance of the religion of others. Even some of the major religions still attack other major religions because of their beliefs. Unfortunately, the word brainwashing is sometimes used as a negative slur or rationalization regarding the belief or attitude changes a person has voluntarily made. This often occurs when one person dislikes the voluntary programming another person has chosen for himself. When someone thusly claims another person's been brainwashed, such as in the case of someone calling a religion a cult, they can then rationalize and justify even kidnapping and truly brainwashing the person to fit their own way of thinking. It is most often used in the case of people who have changed religions, especially to an unconventional or highly disliked religion. Relatives of that person or their previous religion may claim they have been brainwashed by the new religion. For instance, my mother proclaimed I was brainwashed when I returned from Tibet. Obviously, my changes were so radical she had a great deal of support for this claim from all her relatives, friends, and anyone else who would listen to her story. And she tried to have me deprogrammed, brainwashed back to her way of thinking. But it had no effect on me, because only I have been in charge of my programming since I became an adept. There was nothing to deprogram me from, and her real motives were not because she thought I was actually brainwashed. She was just using brainwashing as a rationalization to explain my so-called strange choices in life. The real reason she did it involved my rejection of the family religion, not believing, thinking, or behaving as she did, and she thought I should. Failure to live what she considered a normal life, which would have been becoming a successful doctor or lawyer. And in an odd way, personal rejection and jealousy. Well, I'm going to have to stop there. It's not a great place to stop, but it is getting close to the top of the hour. And there still is about 200 more pages to this book, or PDF. It's a book in PDF form. So, I'll be on this book a while, and I hope that you're enjoying it and getting something out of it. I know that I am. Anyway, I thank you all for listening, and I'll see y'all later. Bye now.